Hello and welcome to Talks at Columbia. My name is Dr. Jason Wingard. I am the Dean and Professor of the School of Professional Studies at Columbia University. Thank you all for being here and welcome again. Columbia University and the School of Professional Studies are tied at the hip. The School of Professional Studies is one of 20 prestigious schools here at Columbia University. And SPS exists to advance knowledge with purpose, to move careers, to move communities, and to move industries. We prepare learners from all backgrounds, whether they're right out of college, whether they're industry practitioners, or whether they're senior executives, to learn for life. Talks at Columbia is a thought leadership series that features Columbia faculty as well as industry practitioners and executives across sectors from around the world. Together, they discuss cutting-edge topics that are rapidly changing the professional nature of the world and society at large. We started Talks at Columbia several years ago at the School of Professional Studies because we have seen that our graduates are graduating into an ever-evolving global marketplace. It's changing quickly, and it demands dynamic skills and continued flexibility to succeed. Our focus at SPS is to respond to those shifts and to help our students, again, learn for life. Our bioethics program is a perfect reflection of our mission at SPS. Bioethics is a subject area of increasing importance globally. The actions of medical and health professionals can have many implications infecting and affecting large swaths of populations around the world and for entire nations. Today's program on the science and ethics of market wellness will feature a discussion between Dr. Chelsea Clinton and Dr. Randi Sutton of Columbia University. Before we open the talk, I would like to introduce our academic director of the Bioethics Master's Program and a distinguished Columbia faculty member, Dr. Robert Klitzman. Bob.
Thank you, Jason. Well, thank you very much, Dean Wingard, and thank you all for coming this evening. We also have about 200 people online all over the world live streaming this event. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Randi Epstein and Dr. Chelsea Clinton. Please come on stage. Randi is a physician, journalist, and friend whom I've known since medical school at Yale. She received both a master's in journalism and a master's of public health from here at Columbia, and she's written outstanding journalism for the New York Times and many other publications, as well as two terrific books, Get Me Out, A History of Childbirth from the Garden of Eden to the Sperm Bank. It's a wonderful book. And most recently, a basis for tonight's conversation, Aroused, the history of hormones and how they control just about everything. I'm also honored to introduce Chelsea Clinton. She received a doctorate in international relations from Oxford and a master's degree in public health from here at Columbia. She too has authored several books and is currently vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, advancing global health, service, and economic opportunity all over the world. She is the daughter, of course, of the 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and of the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, elected by a majority of popular votes as our 45th president. Randi and Chelsea will be having a conversation, and we'll then have time for questions and answers, after which Randi will be selling and signing copies of her book over here. Please join me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello? Oh, good. Thank you, Bob, for that introduction. Jason, thank you for welcoming us so warmly here to the Lowe Memorial Library. I want to thank everyone who made tonight possible. I know events like this are always the product of a tremendous amount of teamwork, so thank you to everyone at Talks at Columbia, everyone kind of from the bioethics program, and anyone else who kind of put in your time to enable us to have what I suspect will be a really interesting conversation, hopefully not just for Randi and me, but really for all of you. It is such a joy to be here with someone that I admire and love as much as Randi, and truly from whom I always learn something. And this is just a terrific book. So I hope that if you have not already got a copy, that you certainly will after our conversation this evening. And I will shamelessly exploit my time on stage with Randi to ask her questions, but also hope that you're thinking about your own questions so that when we move to that part of the program, we can get to as many of you as possible. So Randi, I thought we'd start this evening by just kind of listening to you reflect on why you wanted to write this book right now.
I wanted to delve into hormones and the history of hormones, I think for two reasons. One is because I think we all sort of talk about, oh, we're hormonal. What does it mean? We think it's this vague notion. But they actually are these potent scientific chemicals. Where did we come up with this theory? So there was that scientific reason to sort of explain things. But I also think that now, and if we go back in history, hormones are these things where we think, oh, we're going to be able to live longer. We're going to have a better sex life. We're going to be able to relate to people more. Is there a quick cure? So to me, the subject is hormones, but it's much bigger in the sense of what are we grasping for when we're buying these things? And what are the doctors telling us? And looking at the whole issues of certainty and uncertainty. You know, my doctor said he's not sure, so it's so much easier to go to someone else who says this hormone will make you do that. So I was trying to write sort of the book that wasn't you're gonna live forever book, but the book that's like, I hope these are great stories that will really help you understand what hormones are doing, what you may need, and then how to avoid some of the wacky stuff that's out there then and now.
And one of the things I think Randi does so brilliantly is to share such compelling stories that help animate every chapter in each discrete discussion of hormones. And there are just so many kind of painful and inspiring anecdotes that you share. Painful anecdotes of people who were exploited for their hormonal abnormalities, either for profit or kind of misguided and sometimes malfeasant science, I would say, but also incredible stories of parents who really go above and beyond to try to ensure that their children have access to kind of whatever science thinks is the right answer right now. But one of the stories that really struck me, that you and I have talked a lot about, and I am no less struck the more we talk about it, are all of the men who got vasectomies because they believed it would help, you know, increase their testosterone, make them more virile, and help them live longer. And quite notably, in one instance, the opposite happened. So can you just share that story and also how it helps illuminate kind of how complex and challenging even often well-meaning people kind of are and what they think the science of hormones is?
Sure. I mean, I love the story also because sometimes I think we're thinking, God, 2019, why are people believing this? What's wrong with our society? But go back to 1920, and that was pretty wacky time too. So maybe it's just the way we are as people. We want a quick fix. But the reason why I like this story, and yes, it was this big fad in the 1920s. Men were lining up. Maybe they weren't lining up, but they were going one by one individually in their privacy of their own doctor's room to get a vasectomy.
At least we hope they were
going in
privacy.
But they were getting vasectomies because it was touted that it would boost their libido. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, so just stay for the rest of the talk. But the reason why I like this study is we have in medicine, like we always know, they're like your well-meaning doctors and then they're your charlatans. But there's also this big gray zone of people that do good things, but they kind of made a mistake. Or they just, you know, even great scientists, they take a leap of faith. And then we say, wow, that was brilliant. But that brilliance was a leap of faith. And sometimes people take that leap of faith and they kind of jump the wrong way. So Eugene Steinach was this absolutely brilliant scientist in the 1920s in Vienna. And he was so brilliant, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize 11 times. Not for the vasectomy libido thing, but for actually finding the cell in the body that spews male hormone. Now we know it's testosterone. At the time, it wasn't named. So he did some really good work. The only reason why he didn't get the Nobel was the Nobel Committee did not believe that that cell spews hormone. So the Nobel Committee was wrong, but regardless, brilliant man, nominated for the Nobel 11 times. And then he started getting very interested in like libido and male hormone. He had a hunch, this is where he started to go a little wrong, that male hormone meant everything manly, which to Steinach in the 1920s, he thought that meant thinking well, enterprising, thinking clearly, strong libido, strong male, everything that he thought men were. So then he thought, as he was doing these experiments, if we could just block in some of this male hormone, whatever it is, and not have it go out, then we would just make men smarter and more libidinous and more whatever all that male stuff is. So he did an experiment on a rat, a male rat, and gave the male rat a vasectomy. And I'm sort of jumping over a little of the science, but basically he thought, oh, wow, this worked. He thought his male rat looked more eroticized. That's the word he used. I know it's not a real word. He used that word. I'm not exactly sure how he rated rat eroticism, but maybe there's an expert in the audience and you can tell us after. So he did 1 or 2 experiments on rats, so it wasn't just a trend. And then he told a friend of his who was a doctor. Steinach was a doctor, but he only did research. So he told a surgeon friend, I want you to give a vasectomy to a man and ask him if it, and tell him it might boost his libido and see what happens. One thing led to another, and they were telling men, we're gonna do a vasectomy. And we think this is gonna make you think more clearly. We think this is gonna boost your libido. 100% of men said it worked. I mean, that's amazing, if you base science on testimonials. Freud was Steinach. It actually became so common that it became a verb. You were Steinach. You weren't just like getting a vasectomy for libido, you got Steinach. Freud got Steinach. Yeats, the poet, got Steinach. And then, of course, it just took off in America, because back in the 1920s, this is going to be hard to believe, but stay with me for a minute on this. Back in the 1920s, sometimes people believed in what their friends and testimonials said over what their doctors were telling them. It's shocking, but we've gotten smarter. So there were doctors in the 1920s saying, doesn't really make sense, but men were lining up for this. But Chelsea loves the story of Alfred Wilson. That's what you wanted.
Yes.
You like this punchline.
I know, it's terrible. Please don't think I'm such a macabre person when she gets to the end of the story.
No, just because the guy dies.
Okay, that's the punchline.
So there's this guy, Alfred Wilson, that got Steinach. He was in his 70s, and he thought, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I want to share this with the world. So he rented out the Royal Albert Hall. If any of you have been in London, the Beatles performed there in the 1960s. This was 1918. But already it was like a big fancy place. He rented it out, and he was, I think the title, it's in my book, it was something like, How I Revived Myself. And he was going to talk about that he wasn't thinking clearly, he was slow, he had no libido, he got a vasectomy, and now look at me, I'm like a 20-year-old man. Except, your favorite part, he dropped dead of a heart attack the night before he was supposed to go on. Steinach came right out and said, not my fault, has nothing to do with the vasectomy, but it did put a little skepticism into the value of having the vasectomy.
And one of the reasons I like the story, not only for its dramatic punchline, is that it did inject a bit of skepticism in a healthy sense. So at least people were questioning kind of the eternal value of being Steinach. But Randi, I want to kind of go back to something you said, like we're so much smarter now in 2019 than we were in, a century ago. I know it was a joke. But I am curious, and you and I have talked a lot about this, like why do you think in health, medicine, wellness, kind of the broader category of how we kind of think about ourselves today and what's possible kind of for ourselves in the future, why are we so vulnerable to either kind of the well-meaning gray area where we don't really know enough to have certainty, or actually to medical hoaxes? Why do you think kind of in medicine and health we're particularly willing to suspend critical thinking, to trust our friends, to trust testimonials over kind of what current science is telling us?
Well, I think it hits on 2 things. One, from the scientist perspective, and there's probably scientists in the audience, and so scientists know this. Science is always evolving knowledge, And you learn this right away in medical school or when you're getting your PhD. This is what we think we know now. We're never 100% sure. And your doctor's never gonna say to you, I know this is gonna work. Be on this diet, take this pill, this is the issue. And that uncertainty that is inevitable in science and medicine can be very unnerving for patients.
And then easily exploited.
And easily exploited. So, as you know, I like to say this, and I know this makes you cringe, but if you want to be a good charlatan, if you want to make a lot of money easily, here's what you do. You provide people with certainty. I mean, you only work 9 to 5. You don't take call. That you do. But you provide people with a certainty. You tell them, stay on this diet, I am sure you're gonna feel better. And I'm all for the placebo effect, as long as it doesn't cost you a lot of money and it doesn't have a lot of dangerous side effects. But there are people out there, and I've spoken to them in the process of doing my book, that will tell people things, that will sell things and say there's no side effects. Life has a side effect. I mean, that's, someone said to me, how do you know if like someone's a charlatan, or how do you know? I think someone says there's no side effects, then that's a red flag. Like, that's not a good thing. But so I think that's from the doctor's and the scientist's point of view it's very hard to express uncertainty. It's very hard to explain to patients, I'm doing the best I can with the knowledge we have now, which might change in a few years. And then I think we're all patients, from that perspective, from our perspective, when you're not feeling right, it's so easy when you're feeling healthy to poke fun of other people for grasping at things. But when you're not feeling right, even if you're not in dire pain, but you're just feeling too tired all the time or too foggy, you start to feel desperate. And if someone says to you, look, I'm a little on the vanguard, try this, just try it. Like, I think it's very easy. If it costs a little bit, if it might have a side effect, we just want to feel better. We want to feel our best. And I think we live in this society now where we want to be on top of our game all the time. And if you're not on top of your game and you're feeling like you're sliding and someone's going to offer you a quick fix, it's so hard to say no to that.
Well, and one of the things I think you really draw out with compassion is not only why patients sometimes kind of not only feel that way, but then make decisions from the basis of feeling, but also why doctors sometimes do as well, and trying to provide more certainty or an answer, even if there isn't a real evidence base. And yet sometimes it proves that those hypotheses were correct. Like, I think about the anecdotes around human growth hormone. And yet, even that clearly had often deeply painful unintended consequences. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how sometimes, the kind of well-meaning leaps of faith actually do lead to innovation, not always without challenge, and that can be hopefully a good complement to the Steinac anecdote.
Oh, sure. Okay, so some good things that we've done. One of the stories that I like to tell, I mean, it's so much not actually a hormone, but measuring hormones. And I love this story because it's a New York story. And this is a woman who made a great leap of faith in science, although science kind of tried to keep her out for a while. And it's not actually a story we talk about a lot, so I'm just going to bring it up now. But up until really the 1960s, endocrinology and hormone work was really guesswork. If you went to your doctor because you thought you were lacking a hormone or you thought your kid was too short, they kind of did x-rays, they kind of maybe took some blood tests of varying things, but they couldn't measure hormones. So we're not talking that long ago. Kids born in 1960 or in the 1950s, there was all these other kind of measurements, but you couldn't measure hormones. I mean, think about it. Like now we have the fertility business. Now with measuring hormones. Now we have all these things. You go in and you can know your exact level and how it's changing. But this wonderful event that happened is I was about to say couple, but they were a couple at work, not a husband and wife team, Rosalyn Yalow and Salman Burson. They were working in New York City. I like Rosalyn Yalow's story. I go into it more in the book, but I'll just tell you quickly. She was a poor Jewish girl from New York, graduated from Hunter. She was tops in her class in physics, and she said, this is what I want to do. I love science. She didn't know she was going to get a Nobel at the time. She just wanted to learn. And her teachers said, Rosalyn, this is the 1940s, or maybe they didn't say that, but they did say this. Don't you think it would be more appropriate to become a secretary to a scientist? So she had no choice. It was 1940s. So she got a job for a scientist here at Columbia University because she wanted to take science courses here at Columbia. And her boss said, don't you think stenography would make more sense? So she eventually did get into graduate school. She got a PhD. Her kids have said to me, my mom has no sense of humor. I think from what I've read about her, she had a little sense of humor because she did say they had to have a world war just so I could get a PhD. So she did get into, Purdue University called Hunter and said, we have 2 spots. It's World War II. We can't fill up these programs. She's Jewish, she's a woman. Will you guarantee that you'll give her a job back at Hunter? Because that's where she went to college after her PhD. And Hunter said, we can't guarantee, so they rescinded that. Then University of Illinois did accept her in reluctantly. She got a PhD, met her husband, a New York City guy. She met him out there at University of Illinois. She got her PhD a year before him. He got his job offer first. Figure that out. She eventually got a job in the Bronx in the VA, and in this tiny little lab, which according to lore, I'm not sure it's true, but I still like the story, they gave her a janitor's closet for a lab. But in that lab, she and Solomon Burson figured out this technique, which I think I describe well in the book, but I'm not getting into science here. A scientist will know it as radioimmunoassay, and we still base things on that. But she figured out how to measure hormones. She published the data, sent it in. It was rejected across the board because basically editors who are just flawed human beings were like, no, you can't measure hormones. It's impossible. She was livid. She's like, look at the data. We figured out how to measure hormones because hormones are so sparse in the body. It's like measuring like a teardrop in the ocean. Eventually, she got the piece published. Then she knew this was huge. She knew this could be used to measure drug doses, all things, not just hormones. She knew she was revolutionizing 20th century medicine. And someone said, you got to get a patent right away. And she said, absolutely not. Like, this is so revolutionary. Everyone should be able to do this. So she didn't make a penny on this. And all of a sudden, people were flocking to the VA to learn this technique. And it really did. It changed dramatically, not just endocrinology. We wouldn't have the fertility business. We wouldn't be able to detect, like, HIV in blood. We wouldn't be able to do drug dosing. So I think she took a leap of faith in doing this. And she not only took a leap, but she had to, like, push people in her way in order to get this done. And in her very last talk, which was to a group of public school students in 3rd grade in New York City, she said to them, stick to the data, stick to the facts, and when you know you're right, save all your rejection letters because you can use them as part of your exhibit when you get the Nobel Prize. And she did.
I love that story. And you're right, we should talk about it more. Since we've been in the early 20th century, we've been in the mid 20th century, I just want to give you a chance, Randi, particularly before we open it up to questions, 'cause I think this may help spur questions in the audience, kind of to talk about hormone science today and kind of where you really do see both innovation on the positive side and also kind of what are the hoaxes and the kind of areas of greatest profit for charlatans that really worry you.
Okay. And I'm going to answer this question, then I have a question for you. So people are like, oh, yay, we'll get to your Chelsea thing. So today, I think on the positive note, what we're really getting into is looking at hormones and behavior. We're not there yet. Okay, we know that certain times we might feel more lousy, certain times of the month. We know we feel different whether we're pregnant or menopausal, which we're sharing that on stage today. We thought we did that, yeah. And menopausal. Thank you. But I think where we are today is looking at hormones and behavior, and we're there. We're learning things like one of the last chapters I have is on hormones and hunger and obesity. And the reason I put it last wasn't just because whatever hormones and obesity, I don't know, I put the fat chapter last, but it was also because to me, that's the forefront, and a lot of the research is also being done here at Columbia. We have some leading researchers in leptin and ghrelin and these hormones, because it's not just about metabolism, it's about drives, like what is driving you to eat, what is driving your hunger, what is driving your appetite. And that also shows people like these links between hormones and hunger, hormones and mood, hormone and mood swings. We're getting there, we're not there yet. There is some wonderful research going on. I talk about oxytocin, and this goes into both the good and the bad. There's some fascinating research also here at Columbia. There's a wonderful scientist who's working on oxytocin. We're getting clues. This is the hormone that we know squeezes the uterus to get the baby out. It's also the hormone that gets your milk going when you're breastfeeding. But we also know that it has something to do with mother-baby bonding in rats and infants. And we also think from research going on now, it has something to do with social cues in humans. So something about this, something in the temporal lobe. That's why they think like mothers hearing a baby cry, there is this like flood of oxytocin and certain maternal things then happen. So there's really interesting things going on in oxytocin. There's also really wacky stuff going on in oxytocin. So I think that shows sort of the good and the bad. So you can actually go online, but not now, and you can go on Amazon and spend $48 and get like a spray of oxytocin. It could just be water, but even if it is oxytocin, they claim if you spray it around, like you're gonna get the guy in the bar next to you, you know, the sitting at the bar is gonna like fall in love with you, just the way like your baby's cry makes you wanna hug your baby. So there's, you know, it sounds like something from the 1920s, but this is 2019. So I think, so that's what sort of excites me now. And I think, this is gonna be like an awkward segue, but I think what keeps us both up at night, because sometimes like I'll email Chelsea like late at night and be like, oh my God, did you see this article? Because it just drives me crazy when I see some of the wacky stuff. And I know it drives you crazy, so then we have this bond over that. And I always figure if I email you late at night, I'm not gonna wake you up. You'll just see it at your own leisure. But I wanna know, because we go back and forth with this stuff, like I know you have an interest in healthcare, I know you have an interest in accurate medical communication, but what does keep you up and what do you think is still the one issue or maybe a few issues that still concern you when it comes to healthcare?
Oh, there's so many, and kind of my answer varies based on kind of country context. But just, you know, here in the United States, and one of the things that I think is underpinning so much of what Randi talks about in her book and also has been talking about here tonight, is we do have just an absence of health literacy and scientific literacy and data literacy in our country. And so that I think even people who want to be able to navigate often complex, contradictory, challenging information from a variety of both, I would say, authoritative and not sources, don't even know how to distinguish which are authoritative and which are not, don't know how to kind of translate what they're reading into kind of their own lives or their family lives to make kind of the best data-based decisions for their health or the health of their families. And I think we see this so acutely right now in our debate over vaccines, which I do find very painful from a public health perspective. And also very just painful from a personal perspective, because I remember, as I've shared with Randi, I remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, talking about how proud she was when her children got vaccinated. And she remembered like waiting for her kids to get vaccinated, you know, against polio, against smallpox, you know, something that the first, hopefully, we will eradicate in the near future, and the last, which we, you know, declared victory against in 1980. And just the fact that like we are not only relitigating, but in some ways dismissing and denigrating not just the science, but the progress in public health, kind of for us to get to where we are, kind of in the world of vaccines, is something I find, you know, very upsetting. And yet I also find it encouraging that with the measles outbreaks around our country, including here in New York City, we do see vaccination rates rising. I mean, in Oregon and Washington, you know, we've had 4, 5, 6 times as many people getting vaccinated in the last couple months after the recent measles outbreak than in the kind of couple months preceding that. So I'm hopeful that now that these kind of, deeply serious infectious disease threats are coming back, while I wish that kind of they needed to come back, it hopefully will spur people to action. And yet I still think we have these larger questions of how do we help equip people, not only in institutions like Columbia, but really at the elementary, middle school, high school level, and other civic and public forums, to be able to make not only what they feel are the right choices for themselves and their families, but what they know from an evidence and a data perspective are the right choices for themselves and their families, whether on something that I wish were really kind of quotidian like vaccines, or something that is really evolving science, like everything that Randi talks about related to hormones. So I hope if you take nothing else away from this evening, you will take away that Randi is hilarious, because she is. That she's brilliant. I'm not even saying this because her children are sitting in the front row. That she's brilliant because she is. But also, we have a lot to learn from our past to try to help inoculate us from making the same mistakes in the future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.